All right, welcome. So, growing your brain with reading. This video is all about reading and specifically its impacts on your brain and how it's going to essentially make you smarter and more intelligent. So, when I started reading, I do believe I was a smarter kid growing up, but I was quite lazy. I never actually used that for anything valid, for anything valuable. And so, over time, my brain started to essentially, what I would like to say, clock out, right? My brain just kind of stopped thinking as hard, stopped working as hard, stopped wanting to put in effort for things, stopped wanting to, take in information and then translate that information. I essentially became very lazy, even though I had an intelligent mind. But when I started reading, this I had already killed off this laziness, right? I desired to improve. I desired to take the next steps. And one of the things I wanted to improve was my brain, right? Was my mind and how powerful it was, but also how intelligent I could actually be, right? My capacity for knowledge. So reading was one of the habits that I took on in order to do this. And reading combined with journaling are two of the only things that I say you actually need if you want to become more intelligent, become smarter, and then actually become more charismatic and be able to articulate thoughts into words better, right? So those two things by themselves will absolutely skyrocket your progress if your goal is to improve your brain and its ability to produce, right? So reading increased my brain power and my intelligence. When I started reading, I went from a point where I could learn, if I was to compare it now, right, I could probably learn, let's say 5% out of 100% of like the knowledge that was in a book, right? Like I could take in and absorb and understand probably about 5%. Now I'd say I could probably understand anywhere from 55 to 65%, right? Give or take. And obviously these are general numbers that I'm just making up as a comparison, but by reading over the last 2.5 years, I've just about skyrocketed how well I can comprehend information, how much information I can comprehend, and also how well I can translate that into action and actually integrating it into my life. So by reading alone, I've been able to do this, which is absolutely huge, right? By reading alone, I've been able to become smarter, more intelligent, but also learn how to learn, right? Learn how to take in information, but then translate that into action. Because knowledge without action stops there, right? But knowledge put into action becomes wisdom. So by learning something and then also figuring out how you can integrate it and implement it into your life, that is how you will learn something. Not with one step or the other, right? If you are really good at taking action and you only take action, you will still progress and learn, but only because you are learning from the action itself, right? And so you need learning, you need new information, new feedback, in order to take the correct actions. So action itself is important, yes, but without learning, you won't be able to improve, right? You won't be able to get better. But if you are learning by itself, you won't really make any progress. You need to put that into action. But learning in and of itself teaches you how to learn, and so that is a valuable enough skill for you to still prioritize learning before you've been able to start taking action. I spent probably a year and a half, let's say. I spent probably 4 to 5 months, I'd say, when I first started getting into self-improvement, watching content and just consuming content before I was able to translate it into action. I might have made more progress by taking action first, but I actually believe I learned more by learning everything I needed to learn and then going and taking action, right? And so the learning phase is just as important as the action-taking phase. But if you only learn and you stop there, you won't be able to translate that into actual progress. But reading in and of itself was able to make my brain better at taking in the information and then translating it into applicable action steps. So that way I could learn the most from the books that I was reading, that I started reading, and even courses, right? This translated into courses, right? This translated into conversation with others, translated into just interpreting my own thoughts, because I was able to better absorb and comprehend information and then translate that into something useful. So the impact of reading on the mind. The first one is increased comprehension. Like I have been saying, right? When you are reading, when you are taking in all this information, but not comprehending it, not actually being able to break it down into something that you can understand and then utilize, you are basically getting nowhere, right? You're essentially getting nowhere, right? But when you read consistently, it essentially forces your brain, even if you can't do it at first, right? There were periods of time when I started that I literally could not, I couldn't remember anything that I read. Like, I would read page after page after page, and I just would think back, and I didn't get any of it, right? I didn't get any of it. But as that went on, as I did that more and more and more and kept reading anyways, I started to learn how to actually comprehend the information that I was reading, actually take it and actually absorb it and translate it into something that I can use in my life in order to make more progress. So it will help you increase your level of comprehension, your ability to comprehend information and comprehend knowledge. It also increased my memory, right? So my brain became better at remembering important information, because when you're reading, it forces your brain to, like I just said with the comprehension thing, forces it to take it from being comprehended to, okay, now what are the important pieces that we actually need to memorize? What are the important pieces that actually need to be integrated? So it forces your brain to become better at memory and also better at being specific with which memories to keep, but also which ones not to get rid of, and also the ones to get rid of, right? Because your brain will get rid of a lot of unimportant information, but if you teach it how to, or if you increase your memory through practicing reading consistently, then you will be able to actually take in more of the information and actually remember more of the information and maintain more of the information. But also your brain will become better at removing what is unimportant and only keeping what is genuinely essential. So linguistic understanding, right? So what does this mean? Sounds like a big word. It's not. Basically, you can understand language better, right? Basically, you have better vocabulary and you have better understanding of different ways of speaking. You have a better understanding of how words merge together and how to speak them clearly and how to articulate your thoughts in the best possible way, right? And so you basically get a much better understanding of language, of speaking and how to speak, and also thinking, right? And it gives you the ability to take in more when talking to people, when discussing things with people, and when reading, when watching content, because you have a more broad scope of understanding when it comes to different ways of speaking, right? One thing that's interesting is that when you are reading, you increase your ability to comprehend information, right? Taking this information in and actually translating it into a knowledge base, right? One thing that's interesting is my girl said to me the other day, and this is because I've been reading a lot more, but basically, how did she word it? She said that I can basically take a basic thought, right? A basic idea, right? Something that's insignificant, and then I can turn it into a whole understanding, right? I can take one small concept and I can transform it into a complete understanding and a complete teaching, right? This is because I have learned how to take pieces of information and actually comprehend it into a deep level of knowledge and understanding about certain experiences, certain situations, whatever. So the next thing is clearer thoughts and articulation, right? Basically, when you read more, your brain will be able to think clearer, and it will also be able to take those thoughts, because they're a lot clearer and a lot more structured, you'll be able to take those thoughts and articulate them into words better, because of the fact that you're constantly practicing the skill of essentially thinking out loud, even though you're reading off of the page, but you are essentially reading and then translating that into a thought that is basically thinking it as well. And so it allows you to create a skill within thinking clearly and then articulating that into words. And that's actually where writing comes in. Writing is very important when it comes to taking all of these thoughts and all this information and articulating it into your own words. It is actually also why I do these YouTube videos. But the next thing is mental health, right? So information processing with reading versus scrolling. So when you're reading, you're essentially taking longer to take in the information, right? You're taking in more, yes, but you're taking your time to do it long. Like, it takes longer to absorb and take in all the information. And you are essentially slowly bringing in more information and slowly processing that old information and then continuing to go and take in more. And this becomes a clear cycle. By the end of it, you have fully understood and fully comprehended one piece of knowledge. And so your brain is able to fully take that in and fully do something with that, right? However, when you're scrolling, it is too quick for you to actually fully comprehend any of the knowledge you're taking in. But you're taking in so many different pieces of information that it actually overwhelms the brain and causes this state of dopamine depletion and overstimulation, right? And that is why it's poor for your mental health. It's also why reading is good for your mental health, right? Because it is a healthy way for your brain to take in and process information, right? The reason you scroll, whether you realize it or not, is because you want to learn. Even if it's degenerate learning, even if it's all bullshit, right? Even if you're just watching brain rot, you want to learn something that seems relevant. So you can satisfy the same urge and the same craving by reading books and learning real information. And in doing so, you will have a healthier mind. So now, how to actually read more, right? The best way I found is to just leave books out, right? If you don't, like, you haven't created the habit and you don't read it all, just leave books out, right? Have a book on, let's say, your pillow, for example, so you can read before bed at night. Have a book out on your desk so that when you sit down, instead of grabbing your phone, you have the book there that you look at and you think, oh, fuck, I said I was going to read, wasn't I? And then you're more inclined to actually do it, right? Another thing is to just read what you're curious about. So one other thing that I did was when I started making money, I basically just started buying a shit ton of books, right? I would buy whatever book I wanted to read in that moment. I have a lot of books, but I haven't read all of them. So the point with it is I bought a whole bunch of books. So now I have options, right? Now my room is essentially a mini library, right? But I haven't read all the books on that shelf. So there's a bunch of books there that I'm just like itching to be able to go and read and desire to read. And so that way, whenever I sit down to read, I can always just read whatever I'm actually interested in, whatever I'm curious about. I have a whole bookshelf full of all of the different topics I talk about and I study. So it's perfect, right? I can just go and I can pick from that bookshelf whatever I want. However, not everybody has an entire bookshelf of books that they could read. So your next best option is to just think, what are you actually curious about? What do you really want to learn about? What are you really interested in? And then go find a book on that topic, right? And then read that book. But one of the best ways to look at it is simply just read what is going to be interesting to you. Don't read what you think is necessary. At least not at first, at least not until you've built the habit and the skill. And then you can read for the sake of truly learning, which might include reading some books you aren't necessarily ecstatic to read, but will teach you some important information, right? But for now, just building the skill, you simply just want to read what you're curious about, because what's most important is that you read, right? If you don't do it, then you aren't getting anywhere. And so just by focusing on reading what's interesting to you now, so you can start to do it and start to learn how to properly read, is going to be key. The next thing is read to learn, right? I always read to learn. So if I'm reading, I'm not reading to read a book through, I'm reading to learn something valuable. And usually I'll get an insight, I'll get something that I am inspired by, and then you can go and take action on it, right? Then you can go and do it, right? Then you can go and apply it somewhere. Then you can come back to the book and keep reading, right? And so this is the way that you truly read to learn, is by not just reading to read, but reading to figure something out that you can then apply. And so the other thing is, one way that I use to read faster and read easier is reading in the spaces between the words, right? So what does this mean? Essentially, look at the space between the words, not the words themselves, right? Because this will open your peripheral vision and force you to see more of the sentence at once. And so you can read a lot faster and your brain can comprehend the information better this way. The last thing is, like I said originally, have more books, right? Just have more options, and then it'll be so much easier to read. Like me, I've probably spent $500 to $1,000 on books. So I value my reading a lot more than someone who's only bought one or two books. Even if I haven't read all those books, it's constantly in the back of my mind. Like, I've spent all that money on books. Like, I better be reading, right? Like, I better be applying myself here, because I've put that initial investment in and I have the books, right? The investment is one thing. You could get them all for completely free. If you have more books, it will simply be easier to read just because you have the options, and just because it is a constant reminder, right? When I see my bookshelf every single day, it's very hard to think, oh, let me not read today, right? It's very hard to think like, yeah, that's the last thing I'd want to do is read. Because usually I'm looking at my bookshelf and I'm looking at 3 different books I really want to read, right? And so that kind of helps to shift your mindset and also shift your identity to being more of a reader. I mean, someone with a literal library in their room ought to identify as a reader, right? And so you create this identity by having the books in the first place. But another thing is, don't just buy books for the sake of buying books. Buy books because you're reading them, right? Buy books because there's something that will impact you positively, and that will be a beacon of growth for you in the future. So if you guys want to read more and you would like to, you could go ahead and check out my Instagram and DM me there. I have 2 ebooks out right now, and I have one that I'm working on right now that is a dopamine detoxing ebook. So if you guys are interested in that, and if you guys would like early access to that, you go ahead and DM me on Instagram. But aside from that, you guys can go and look at the first link in the description to join my coaching program. And that's all for me. And I'm out of here. Peace.